Mario Bros. 3 had everything going for it. A talented team at the top of their prime, Miyamoto being given the reins effectively for the first time, a huge amount of marketing push, a gargantuan amount of support from basically every avenue, and a system that was proven and had a huge market base. Mario World crushed Mario Bros. 3 like a bug. And it had none of that going for it. Or at least, not as much of it. And I'm only pointing that out because it says so much about everything you need to know about Mario World. Now, Mario World did have one other thing going for it. It was on the SNES. And I know what you're thinking, duh, lore, anything that's new on a system tends to sell very well. Not quite what I meant. This was the beginning of the big gaming boom, one that would last for several years here, but what would really take off with the advent of a game a few years after that, Final Fantasy VII and Doom. And I know that the timing is kind of wonky, but do please understand, excuse me, this is when gaming stopped being that niche little thing for people who are into it and started becoming publicly accepted and publicly aware of. It started kind of branching out. And as a result of that, more and more and more people started playing video games. Now, the timing of the Super Mario World release wasn't perfect for that, which is why I say it doesn't completely have that going for it. But it is certainly worth noting that plenty of people, this was not just their first Mario game, this was their first video game. And it shows in many ways. But I'll get to that in a minute. What's really funny, though, how many people worked on Mario Bros. 1? 8. How many people worked on Mario Bros. 3? About 30-ish. We're not sure of the exact numbers. How many people worked on Super Mario World? 10. And it was a rush development. And they didn't even have the dev kit yet. This game originally... So, obviously, this was designed as a Mario Brothers. In fact, it was originally branded as Super Mario Bros. 4. You can still see plenty of stuff that actually indicates this if you find any of the original Japanese advertisement materials. But what I mean by that is this was another Mario Brothers game. And several of these levels are very clearly designed in the exact same style, the same thumbprint or blueprint of the Mario 3 worlds. Now, that's not a bad thing. But it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Because the main reason for it is because the SNES was so new and they were so rushed trying to get it out and trying to get it into the hands of people that they didn't have time to do what they normally do. Now, I don't know full details, so please forgive me for speaking in broad generalizations. As usual, I'm only a tier 2, 2 layers up kind of an analysis person. But what I do know is that when they came up with a new console, any console, this is true even for more modern stuff like the Xbox SX and the PS5, you send out a copy. You purchase a dev kit and you purchase a license to make games on it. And you get this kit and you get the programming tools and you get the hardware, a test version of the console. And all this stuff exists for you to be able to make sure your game, runs and to be able to get it playable on the system. Now, they didn't have any of that. They were still designing and building the SNES when they were actually starting development of this game. Now, obviously, by the time the game came out, the SNES was out. But you could see how, because they pushed the development of the game so far before that, they didn't make the console, then make the game. They made both at the same time. So none of those tools were really available to them. And if you ever wonder why the Super Mario World has certain things that are very technically unimpressive for the SNES, this is why. Usually early games in a console are unimpressive, but this is a specific extra additive on top of that. If you ever want to see the difference between the same developers working on the same system with slightly different toolkit, look at the difference between this game and Super Mario World 2, aka Yoshi's Island. I actually showed this off during the stream, and this difference is stark, but I'm getting off topic. So they didn't have that going for them. But still a lot of people jumped into this. And of course, why wouldn't they? After all, this game had the biggest thing possible going for it. Yoshi! Sorry. A friend of mine could do a perfect Yoshi! I've kind of been losing it over the years. My voice is getting too deep. But 10 people, new thing, whole cool thing. Cool. Let's do this. Let's make this game. But the really cool thing, and the thing that I think that they did wonderfully, is they really wanted to... There were certain things they really wanted to include, and they kind of shaped the game around those things. And I think that was the right move to do. There are two major elements that this game is centered around. And the first is, and this is not a meme, Yoshi. Now, we all know that Miyamoto is big into cowboys and riding horses and all that kind of stuff, and has been since he was a child. So he's always wanted to include this. In fact, I actually showed off on camera an old 1984, I believe, game called Devil World, which is the first game to include Yoshi. He looks a little bit different, but it is the same design concept, and it is what was eventually developed into this extremely adorable thing. Oh, I don't know if you can see. This is the yarn one. This is Void Yoshi, for those of you who remember. So Void Yoshi here came out of that, and they centered an enormous amount of the design of the game around Yoshi. Ignoring the fact that there's Yoshi's Island, think about all the things that Yoshi does as a power-up. So, first of all, if you lose him, you are not hit back in the same way that you are with losing other power-ups. Second of all, you have the ability to regain it, unless he drops into a pit or a lava pit, which I guess is just a different kind of pit. I'm not sure what happens if he drops into an avocado pit. Maybe he just eats it. But either way, he drops down, and he starts running back and forth. And he'll run off a cliff into a pit. Otherwise, if something stops him, he'll turn around. And even if he is running off a cliff, you can recapture him. This is one of the only instances of being able to regain a power-up in Mario history. There's also the fact that he can eat an enormous amount of enemies in the game. He can step on enemies you otherwise couldn't, so now we have Spike Shield and the ability to deal with an enormous amount of enemies based on that. There's the fact that he gets all the different power-ups, including the ability to shoot fireballs in a trio spread in front of him, the ability to stomp, and the ability to just straight up fly. Just whoosh, off you go. And there's the fact that he has, the baby forms, which you can then power up to get a full form by feeding them a certain number of things. And you know what? I feel like I'm actually still missing a few things. Oh, of course I am. You can use him to double your jump height by jumping off his back. You know, meme, yada yada. Get the memes out of get out of your system. It's okay. But it is nevertheless something that is taken into account when it comes to jump height. You can have, I think it's 11 blocks. No, it doesn't sound right. I think it's 8 blocks of height normally under ordinary circumstances. No, that doesn't sound right. I think it's 6 actually. 6 blocks of jump height under normal circumstances. I'm not sure of the number. But with Yoshi, you effectively double that. It's actually like 11, I want to say, with the total. And that's probably where I got that number from. And this huge amount of stuff completely changes how you play the game based on whether or not you have Yoshi or not. You also can't do certain actions with him, like you can't shoot fireballs, or you can't glide with the feather properly. And some of the physics of how your jump moves is just a little bit different while you're on him. And all of this just goes to show how much effort and work they put into making Yoshi work. This makes sense. I'm not joking when I said earlier, Miyamoto has been wanting Yoshi in the series since day one, since Super Mario Brothers. It's just now we can actually do it. Cool. The other thing is the thing I already alluded to. This was designed to be people's first video game. Now, I'm going to go ahead and shout out, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Patrick Holloman. He's over at the Reverse Game Design Forum. You can find him on YouTube. He's done some videos about this subject, and he's got an ebook, which I actually purchased. I purchased all of them. As well as, I think he has physical copies of his books now. So shout out and plugs to him, because he's awesome, and he's done some great stuff. But I want to mention just how much design was put into Mario World. It's nuts! I'm only going to mention 2 examples, because if I just sat here and gave every example, well, then I'd just be repeating the stream. Go watch the stream. My favorite example is right at the very beginning, and I mention this because, to my knowledge, no one else really ever covers this exact example of design. So what happens? Mario starts up, a demo plays. It's actually one of the special levels. Cool. The demo immediately shows you things you can do. Picking up and grabbing something, throwing it, running, jumping on back of Yoshi, eating something with Yoshi, getting hit, using it just runs through a gamut of this is how the game works. On the off chance if you don't have the manual, which also tells you all this stuff, this enables you to be able to have an idea of what you're getting into. It gives you the all-important context. We see, therefore we know what we can do. Your emulative creatures and all. Or, after all. Excuse me, sorry, I don't know what's up in my throat right now. So, then we hit start. There's a bit of a story snippet. Cool. Most of the story in this game is actually told in the sunken ship later on, but let's not get into that. No, what we instead see is that we start off here, we walk up, and we're on this little house. And there's an arrow sign pointing both left and right, and there's a path going left and right. This is absolutely brilliant, because it literally forces the player to understand how the overworld works and how stage select works. If you hit just about any button other than left or right, you enter Yoshi's house, and then you could leave it, and then you go back to the world map, giving us the idea of how to enter a stage. You cannot just go one direction. Now, Mario Bros. 3 certainly had multiple branching paths in its overworld, except for World 8. Mario World has branching paths in almost every single world, and even that's kind of an asterisk, because even World 1, Yoshi's Island, the first land, is still a world that has a branching path, because you could go up the side area up to the yellow switch palace, which I'll talk about in a second, too. So that's the other thing I'm going to point out. So, we can go left or right. With that extremely simple setup, we know how to enter stages, and we know that there's going to be multiple options for how we progress the stage. In other words, something that's so basic and ordinary to you and me, something that we've all understood for years, is something we've all understood for years because they bothered to do it like this. They bothered to think about it so that even with no concept of a video game, you can still look at this and say, oh, okay, so I get to move on this little grid, this board game map, if you will, and I could select which area I go into. Okay. And they might not have the terms and the concepts, but they get the general idea. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. But I mentioned the Switch Palace. If you're paying attention, and I wouldn't blame you if you're not, but all of the stages in the World 1 are yellow. They all have the yellow icon on them. When you get to Donut Plains, the first stage you're in, red. Now, maybe you don't know what that means, and that's entirely feasible. So you go through the red stage. It introduces you to the nature of capes. The cape is stupid good. We'll talk about that in a minute. You get through the cape stage, and there's this weird, sideways thing and some green outlines going up. I'm not sure what that is, but whatever. We're just going to beat the stage. We beat the stage. Cool. Then we're going to go to the left. If you're paying attention, please put it into your mind. You're playing the game normally. You've never played a video game before. But there's a decent chance you either have or know that there's that switch palace, the yellow switch palace. You might not have gone that way, but whether you go that way first or not it's kind of a coin flip. It's left or right. But at the very least, you are guaranteed to see it. You'll notice it's not on the first map. It's here on Donut Plains. Why? Because they want you thinking about it here. The switch palaces are relevant for Donut Plains, not for the original stages in the first world. Because they want you thinking about the concept of these alternate routes leading to these switch palaces. Now, we go left, we go through a cave. Oh, those pipes are weird. And there's some that are differently colored than the others. And it's not exactly out of bounds to try and go in one of them, because it's a Mario game, and by this point, we've already had concepts such as going through pipes tutorialized for us. So we try to go in one, and hey, it leads to this green switch palace. Now, all the switch palaces are just bonus games. There's no real challenge there. Unless you try to get a yump. By the way, I got one yump this playthrough. I'm very happy about that. They managed to get through. And we go to the overworld, and even if this is your first switch, now it's going pong. Well, that's interesting. And now we see on the overworld map, because we went to that thing, the path, which is clearly drawn on the overworld map, going north, branches off to the left. With all of these visual cues, with the switch, from the yellow switch, with the red item, the red stage select, and with the fact that the game tutorialized the very concept of branching paths right off the get-go, and the green switch palace, now we have all the pieces in play to understand there are multiple exits to levels. There are multiple ways to go through the levels in addition to the overworlds. Now, on the off chance you decide to go back to that first stage, I wonder what's in there. Guess what they do? They have a giant wall of green barrier in your way. You almost can't you almost can't avoid getting the secret exit there after getting the switch. And once you do, lo and behold, north you go. Now, this is another thing Mario World does in spades, and I do like this. It's an interesting approach because it's different than most of the platformers we've covered on the show. Rather than having themes or concepts or tutorializations or slow developments and escalations within a stage, it's more like they have them within a bundle. I'd say within a world, but there's some caveats to that because there's multiple bundles per world. So every stage I just mentioned, Donut Plains 1, Donut Plains 2, the Green Switch, and Donut Plains Water, the first secret one, all of these stages are part of one singular bundle. There's actually another one, which I'll get to in just a moment. All of this helps, and also Yellow Switch Palace, by the way, all of this helps get us into the mode and idea of what we're doing and how we're doing it. The other one is, of course, the ghost houses. This was the origin of the ghost houses in the franchise, and can I just say, ghost houses are usually some of my favorite stages in any Mario games. Especially the 3D ones, like Mario Galaxies, Mario 3D World. They do so many incredible... The ghost stages have always been, this goes back to Mario World, the stage where they just do whatever they want. There's multiple exits in all of them except for one, the chocolate one. And all of them have just slightly different variants, different rules, because it's a ghost house. And we're tutorialized on this right off the get-go, because we walk in, and we lose Yoshi if he's not there. Ka-kong! Now, if you're paying attention, we can't encounter a ghost house until we've encountered a fortress. The first fortress, which should be Larry's, but it's actually Iggy's, because let's script the order for no reason. I don't know. So, Iggy's fortress already got across the idea of, this is a special stage. Even though it looks different on the map, if for some reason that didn't click for you, the fact that you lose Yoshi and there's an intro cutscene does get across the idea. The main reason they specifically remove Yoshi for these is because they can do different things in the absence of Yoshi within these. And if you pay attention, every castle, some of the fortresses, and all of the ghost houses all have unique or varying mutators or themes on... So either themes or mutators on themes. Excuse me, let me say that correctly. With regards to how they're designed. The first one has the fence that you grab onto and climb around on. The second one is a big thing about the pressing of the stone, like there's stuff like that. The third one introduces the magic Koopas to us, and so forth and so on. Each one of them, well, let's call it what it is a tech demo. This is them experimenting with what they can do with the SNES hardware. Or did you never notice that each of the bosses, each of the major, I can't think what they're called, the Koopa Kids, God, I cannot think today. I've been playing Mario World for like 8 hours, give me a break. Each of the Koopa Kids, they were Koopalings. All of them are ways to manipulate the hardware rather than being actually well-designed fights. Because let's be honest, the fights kind of suck. But each one of them actually tries something different. And tries to say, okay, well, let's see what we can do with this mode 7. Let's see what we can do with altering the back. Let's see what we can do with making something adhere to this. What if we make it so that this goes this way and this mutates this way? And they were just playing with what they could do with it. This, of course, leads me to the ghost houses, which I already mentioned. Or no, I already talked about that, sorry. I already talked about the ghost houses. I talked about that. I think that's most of the major stuff I wanted to talk about. Again, I could just go down the list. But one of the really interesting things, and one of the side consequences of the rushed nature of this game, and the tech demo nature of this game, I mean, don't mistake me, tech demo is not necessarily an insult. Obviously, I love Mario World. I gave this game a fairly high score. And F-Zero, that's a tech demo game, like we're 1-to-1. But, and I like F-Zero. The game continues to do this kind of escalation thing as we move through each of these stages, which is very common for any good level design or game design in general, until we get to Butter Bridge. Now, opinions vary on the specific moment of change, but as in my opinion, this is the moment in which they stopped having time to take their time. What does good level design really take? Creativity, passion, interest, knowledge, understanding? Oh, sure. But no, what good level design really takes is time. I've talked about this many times before, and I'll talk about this many times forward. You just lay it out, then you test it, then you polish it, then you change it, then you alter this, then you do this, then you think about this other level and how it's going to relate to that one. So you introduce this concept here, and you have this enemy here. You place the enemies, you replace the enemies, you replace the enemies, you change the terrain, you do it, and you just keep going over it over and over again as you keep designing this. It takes time. It is a very iterative process by its nature. And it very much feels like somewhere around Butter Bridge, they ran out of time. The Butter Bridge stages are pretty mean. They're pretty much straight up Mario 3 stages, as I referenced earlier. And they also have an exit which, I kid you not, stymied me until I was in my 20s. I know. Go ahead, make fun. It's okay. I could never figure out the cape as a kid. Which I suppose is a good enough segue to talk about the cape. Everybody talks about the cape. People in the Mario 3 video and stream talked about the cape. And the inevitable comparison is Mario 3 versus Mario World, which I think is silly. I think they're both great games. Although if you put a gun to my head, I'd say Mario World is better. That being said, I do think the cape is the superior power-up purely from a practical perspective to the leaf over in Mario 3. And the reason I say that is because the cape is so much more designed, and something I've talked about a lot when it comes to game design is I don't mind it if the player earns being overpowered. You know what I mean? I think this actually first really came into my wheelhouse when I started digging into Final Fantasy V, which is about 20 years ago at this point, and really looking into that and just figuring out just all the ways you could break that game. And it always kind of irritated me, and I never really understood why, when people would say Final Fantasy V is super easy. It wasn't until I had more confidence in my own opinion and was able to actually formulate my thoughts into something that is relatively coherent that I realized why it bothered me so much. Because Final Fantasy V is not an easy game. It's actually pretty rough. But if you know what you're doing, you can break that game over your knee. And that doesn't bother me. In fact, I kind of like that. I think that's good design. If you design a game that is actually pretty, properly difficult, has actual challenge to it, and then you go ahead and give the player the tools to, optionally, make the game substantially easier for themselves, that's hard to do. You don't just stumble into something like that. That takes work, that takes time, that takes care, that takes craft. And that is exactly what the cape is. It enables you to do stupid things in this game. Or, if you're not that good at it, it enables you to kind of fly with kind of a slowly descending thing. Or it allows you to slow your descent. Or, there's several bits of utility from the existence of the cape. The fact that it allows you to take a hit without actually dying, the fact that it allows you to go vertically up in a great way, the fact that it gives you a huge amount of horizontal access, and the fact that it gives you the fact that you can recover from your falls a little bit. It is a lot of tech and a lot of utility, and almost all of that is entirely on you. You decide exactly how useful the cape is. During this particular playthrough, I actually went out of my way to not use the cape primarily, because I wanted to show off the level design a bit, and let's be honest, flying over most of the levels is kind of boring. So instead I actually tried to be like, okay, hang on, let's go back, let's show all this stuff off. And that led to some deaths, because it's me, and I'm terrible. I'd like to say I only died at the stupid stuff, but no, I died at the outrageous level so many times, oh my god. But I beat outrageous without a cape. Because I could. This game is plenty difficult. It's not super hard. I wouldn't even list this in as hard as Mario 3, for example. But the reason people, my opinion, the reason people tend to say, oh, this game is super easy, is because of the fact that they just try to cheese it and smash it into the ground. The same reason people say Final Fantasy V is super easy. Now, saying those people are wrong feels a little bit too harsh, but those people are wrong. It's simply too dismissive of a statement. It doesn't take into account all of the tools at display, and it doesn't take into account the fact that they have chosen to make it easy. Which is a good thing, because the game lets them. Have you ever done a small-only playthrough of Mario World? That's rough. It's not as rough as Yoshi's Island can be, but it's still pretty rough. Now, I mention all of this, though, because it's not about the difficulty or the ease of the game. That's an anecdote kind of a thing. It's an ancillary. The reason I mention all this is because I'm trying to give my evidence for why I feel the cape is the superior power-up from a pragmatic perspective, from a utilitarian perspective. Because there's one last thing the cape does, which is objectively superior to the leaf in Mario 3. And it saves you wear and tear on your controller and your hands. I'm not joking. Only within the last, I'd say about 5 or so years, have game developers realized that button mashing isn't necessarily a good thing. It's such a normal thing, and it goes all the way back to the arcade era, for people to do something, and you just have to mash as quickly as possible, right? This causes damage long-term to your controllers, and hurts your wrist, hurts your muscles, hurts your fingers. Mario World allows you to just hover. Whereas Mario 3 requires you to mash. Not super fast, but Anybody who's played Metal Gear Solid 1 probably knows what I mean, why this can be a really unpleasant thing. Now, that being said, I don't want to sound in any way dismissive of other people's opinions. Most people I know prefer Mario Bros. 3 over World. And in fact, I even agree with their reasoning to do so. Mario 3 tried more things than Mario World did. And Mario 3 is just more colorful in its overall approach and tone. Probably because Mario 3 had all that extra time and effort and polish to be able to be made. Whereas this game, you can kind of tell when they started running out. So I don't actually dismiss anyone's opinion on that. I personally put Mario World a bit over it for several key reasons. First of all, that excellent tutorialization, as I mentioned earlier. Second of all, there's a lot of really small gimmicks we only really see once in this game. Tech demos, right? Once is a bit of an exaggeration, but for example, the wall thing with the fence, there are 2 instances of that in the entire game. How many caterpillars are there when you ride the platform? 2. Think about some of the gimmicks on some of the special stages. Think about those timer platforms, which have a timer counting down and then they drop down in Bowser's Valley. Think about the section of the sunken ship where the boos fade in, then fade out, and then fade in a new pattern, and fade out, and then a new pattern, and fade out. All of these little things are inventive, interesting stuff. And again, it's them clearly playing with the hardware. I think the reason most people tend to not remember those is because they're so brief. And again, no blame intended here. Mario 3 would introduce something and then play around with it, with the exception of Karibo's Shoe. Whereas Mario World introduces a thing, and then we move on. All of this leads me to my final conclusion. I really feel like we would have even better of a Mario World than we already have if they had had the time to properly design it. And you're probably thinking, okay, Laura, you keep saying they were rushed. Why were they rushed? So, I have a term I call the money people. It's a broad catch-all term, and it's that way on purpose, because the specific individuals and the specific posts within a company varies. So one company's CFO might be a money person. Another company's CEO might be a money person. The member of the board or the president of the board of this company might be a money person. And there's usually multiple money people within a given company. Money people are the people who make the decisions. They are the ones who have the final say and actually call the shots when it comes to companies. That's what that means. The money people at Nintendo were worried about this thing that was already kind of coming out, that you may have heard of, called the Sega Genesis. Now, Sega was already trying to directly compete with Nintendo. I'm not going to cover that history here. We've already covered Phantasy Star, for example. But the Sega Genesis was an attempt to leapfrog over Nintendo. The Sega Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog were not competing with Super Mario World. They were competing with Super Mario Bros. 3. And that's a key distinction to keep in mind there. Now, while Super Mario World came out earlier in Japan, remember, the Sega Genesis and Sonic came out here in the States first, because that was the market they were pointing to. One of Sega's truly few really intelligent decisions, they realized just how gargantuan of a market the United States was for gaming at the time. See the aforementioned comments about the boom. Now, Nintendo knew that too, which is why they were rushing. They were like, oh shoot, that's our competition. So they managed to smash out the game, and then they had to get working on localizing, and they still didn't quite make it. Even though Super Mario World came out in November the previous year, I believe that's 1990 in Japan, it didn't come out until August here in the States. Whereas Sega and Sonic beat it by a few months, coming out in June. So this is the reason for all the rush. Miyamoto himself has said several times in a couple of interviews I've read that he regrets this substantially, but still considers this one of the best games he's ever worked on, and I can see why. I could just sit here and absolutely gush over every tiny little detail of this game, of the multiple paths through the forest, or I could talk about how when you get to that one donut plane stage, and there's these kind of rotating platforms, and we go from 3 platforms to 1 platform as the escalation of the design slowly increases. I could talk about how there's this one stage where you've got boiling chocolate underneath you, and you've got these sideways things. I could guess about the special stages and how it's clear that they just absolutely threw everything at the wall to try and be as creative as possible. One of my favorite stages in this game is 5 seconds long. How many of you know the one, before I even talk about it? How many of you know it? It's one of the star worlds, star levels specifically in the star world, where you start off here, there's a Lakitu, and there's the goal right there. And the first exit is just to walk through. It takes 5 seconds. And the other one is to, and the reason I love that stage so much is because you just go through the stage exit and it's like, Well, that's not right. And by that point, you've probably already figured out that each star level has a secret exit, but on the off chance you haven't, that definitely will tell you. So it's like... And so you go back to the stage like, what am I missing? And it encourages you to think. All of the star levels encourage you to think and try to just kind of push yourself beyond the bounds of what you've already been doing. Nothing super fancy or super amazing, but again, something to help encourage people who've played video games for the first time to really start branching out in. And then we've got the special stages, which take that and absolutely run with it. Except for Outrageous, which can go to hell. There's actually 2 special stages I didn't care for. Outrageous, and I forget the name of the other one. The other one is a straight up... it's the one where there's a current pushing against you. That one's not really interesting, because the only thing they do is they have a current pushing against you. And then they've got Hammer Bros, and then they've got the fish, and that's it. Whereas every other one of those stages is very well carefully laid out and designed, thought, and effort, and I could just gush about them forever, and Lord knows I did. We actually did the special stages first, just to gush about them, and I gave most of the special stages a separate positive, because they're awesome. But I suppose I can only gush about all this stuff for so long, so I have 2 questions for you, if you don't mind. What's your favorite stage? What's your favorite song? I've already kind of told you my favorite stages. There's like 3. The Chocolate Ghost House, Larry's Fortress, and that one Star World. Those are my 3 favorite stages right there. And I guess I'll talk about them. Why not? The Chocolate Ghost House is the only ghost house that has only one exit. But it's mean. What it does is it has a ghost who has a fishing rod, and that fishing rod is holding a flame. That ghost will kind of go up and down, back and forth, and home in on you. So you have some control over his movement, but not total. There's also the undead dinosaur ghosts who move in patterns towards you, either like this to encourage you to jump between them, like this to encourage you to jump over them, or like this to encourage you to maneuver through them somehow. And then you have chunks of the ground, which are just not only vanished, but the part that's vanishing is moving left and right. All 3 of these things you encounter, and you encounter a mild version, a medium version, and a difficult version. Proper, wonderful escalation in one of the harder stages in the game. I love it. Larry's Castle is almost the exact same thing. It's kind of a final exam sort of a castle for most of the other fortresses we've had prior to now, with the caterpillar and the spikes and the lava and just gush, 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 gush. Song-wise, I'm torn on this one. Because going into it, if you asked me before I walked into it, I would probably say either Bowser's Valley or the Final Boss song, both of which they do excellent stuff with. But upon this replay, I think I've changed my answer. I think just the Fortress song is actually my favorite going forwards. What about you? As always, I do like hearing your responses and hearing your thoughts and comments. Tomorrow, we cover Mario Sunshine, a much more contentious Mario. So that'll be fun. I can't wait to go play Pachinko. I'll see you next time. Oh, wait. Let's bring Yoshi up here. Here we go. Yoshi!